The night she left, she didn't take the photos from the wall. She took the silence. I came home late from work and found the apartment too clean, the kind of clean that feels like a crime scene. Her shoes were gone. Her coat was gone. The smell of her shampoo still floated in the bathroom like a ghost that hadn't figured out it was dead. On the kitchen table, there was a folded note and the spare key. It said, "I don't recognize the man I live with anymore. I need to breathe." That was all. No fight. No tears. No dramatic goodbye. Just a sentence sharp enough to cut through 3 years of excuses. For a long time, I stood there with my briefcase still in my hand, listening to the refrigerator hum. I had spent months convincing myself we were fine. We had a schedule, bills paid on time, and dinners that lasted exactly 15 minutes before I opened my laptop again. I told myself that was adulthood. I told myself love didn't have to be loud to be real. But she had been loud. I just learned how to mute her. We met when I was broke and angry at the world. She worked at a bookstore near my old apartment. I used to go there just to feel like someone expected me to exist somewhere. She had this way of tilting her head when she listened, like every word was something she could hold. Back then, I was full of plans. I talked about starting my own company, about proving everyone wrong, about building something that mattered. She believed me before I did. When I finally got my chance, it felt like I was stepping onto a moving train. Long hours, new clients, emails at midnight. The more exhausted I became, the more important I felt. I mistook stress for purpose. She tried to talk to me, not in accusations, but in questions. When was the last time we went somewhere without your phone? Do you still like what you're building? Do you still like us? I answered with logic. I said this phase was temporary. I said sacrifice was part of success. I said we were doing this for our future. The problem was, I never asked what kind of future she wanted. The first real crack came on our anniversary. She made reservations at a place we used to dream about going when we were broke. Candlelight, quiet music, the kind of place where you're supposed to talk. I arrived 40 minutes late, straight from a meeting, still arguing with a client on the phone as I sat down. I remember her face when I said, "Just one more minute." She waited. Then she picked up her bag and said, "I already waited all year." That night, we didn't fight. We negotiated. I promised weekends. She asked for presents. I gave her half measures and called them compromises. After she left, the apartment felt too big. I slept on my side of the bed like the other half might accuse me of something. At work, people congratulated me on a new contract. I smiled like a man who had just won something he couldn't carry home. A week later, I saw her by accident. She was standing outside the bookstore where we met, holding a coffee, laughing with someone I didn't know. It wasn't a romantic laugh. It was lighter than that. Free. I wanted to walk up and tell her I could fix it, that I had finally learned how empty the place was without her. But I stayed across the street, pretending to check my phone, because I wasn't sure who I would be lying to more, her or myself. That night, I went back to the office instead of home. I worked until the cleaning staff arrived. I stared at the city from the window and realized I didn't recognize the man reflected in the glass either. I had built something impressive and hollow at the same time. I tried dating after that. It felt like borrowing someone else's coat. Nothing fit. Every conversation circled back to what I did for a living, and I let it because I didn't know what else to talk about. Without her, I had no witness to the version of me that used to dream instead of calculate. One evening, I found an old notebook in a drawer. It was from before my promotion, before the long hours. Pages full of ideas, stupid business names, even a list titled "Things I Don't Want to Become." The first line said, "Someone who forgets who he's doing this for." I sat on the floor and laughed until it hurt. Losing her didn't make me better right away. It made me honest. For the first time in years, I admitted that I had used ambition to avoid asking harder questions about myself. I had hidden inside work because it praised me without demanding intimacy. It gave me control without vulnerability. The silence she left behind started to feel like space. And in that space, something uncomfortable began to grow. The uncomfortable thing that grew in that space was a question I couldn't escape. If I wasn't chasing success, who was I? For weeks after she left, I kept my routine like a superstition. Same alarm, same coffee, same train, same office. I told myself stability was healing. In truth, I was afraid that if I stopped moving, I would feel everything at once. It started breaking when my boss called me into his office and said, "You look tired. Take a few days. We won't collapse without you." I almost laughed. The idea that the company could survive without me felt like an insult. It also felt like relief. So I went home in the middle of a workday and sat on the couch where she used to read. I noticed things I hadn't before. A small crack in the wall from when we moved the bookshelf. A stain on the rug shaped like a country neither of us could name. I realized how many parts of our life I had let become background noise. I opened the notebook again. Past the business ideas, there were other lists. Movies we wanted to watch. Places we wanted to visit. A line that said, "Learn how to cook something that takes longer than 10 minutes." Her handwriting appeared in the margins sometimes, teasing me for my spelling or adding something practical to my fantasy plans. I tried to call her that night. She didn't answer. I didn't blame her. I just wished I had run out of things to say before she ran out of patience. The next day, I went to the gym for the first time in months, not to punish myself, but because I didn't know where else to put the energy. I ran until my chest burned and my thoughts went quiet. In the locker room mirror, I saw a man who looked successful and unfamiliar, like I had put on someone else's life and forgotten to take it off. I started making small changes that felt pointless but weren't. I left work before dark. I cooked instead of ordering. I turned my phone off for an hour each evening. The silence was still there, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was observant. One Saturday, I passed the old park where we used to sit and talk about nothing important. A street musician was playing a song she loved. Without planning to, I sat on the same bench. I remembered how she used to say that music sounded different when you weren't in a hurry. I stayed until the musician packed up. I didn't check the time once. That was the day I understood something I didn't want to. Even if she came back, I couldn't offer her the same life. That life was the reason she left. I finally heard from her in the most ordinary way possible. A message that said, "I found one of your books. Do you want it back?" We met in a cafe halfway between our old apartment and her new place. She looked the same and completely different. The same eyes, the same hands, a calmer posture, like she had set something down and didn't intend to pick it up again. We talked about neutral things at first. Work, friends, the weather pretending to be spring. Then there was a pause that felt familiar and foreign at the same time. "You look different," she said. "So do you," I answered. She smiled, but it didn't mean what it used to mean. I had to learn how to be alone again. "I think I'm learning now," I said. It was the most honest sentence I'd spoken in years. I wanted to apologize for everything. For the missed dinners. For the half-listening. For loving her in theory instead of in practice. But I didn't want to turn the conversation into a confession that asked for forgiveness I might not deserve. Instead, I said, "I didn't know who I was without you." That scared me. She looked at her coffee like it had an answer in it. That scared me too. I didn't want to be the only thing holding you to yourself. When we stood to leave, I felt the old instinct to promise change. To offer a better future. To ask her to try again. But something else stopped me. A quieter voice that sounded more like me. "I'm glad you left," I said. "I don't think I would have found this version of myself otherwise." Her eyes softened. "I hoped you would." We hugged. It was gentle. Complete. Not the kind of hug that tries to trap someone in it. I walked home alone, but not hollow. I understood then that losing her wasn't the punishment. Staying the same would have been. After that meeting, something in me shifted from regret into motion. I didn't quit my job. I didn't shave my head or book a flight to another country. The change was quieter than that, and maybe harder. I started paying attention to what I was running toward instead of what I was running from. I asked my boss to move me off one of the high-pressure accounts. He looked at me like I was confessing a crime. "You're our strongest closer," he said. "Why would you want less?" "I don't want less," I said. "I want something I can live inside." He gave me a month to prove I wouldn't fall apart. With fewer late nights, time became a strange new possession. I didn't know how to spend it at first. I walked more. I sat in cafes without opening my laptop. I listened to conversations around me instead of pretending not to. It felt like learning a language I had forgotten. I started volunteering at a community workshop a few blocks from my apartment. They taught basic business skills to people trying to start small projects. A woman who wanted to sell handmade soap, a guy building furniture from scrap wood, a retired teacher trying to launch an online tutoring site. They didn't care about my title. They cared if I could explain things in a way that made sense. It was the first time in years that my work felt connected to faces instead of screens. One night, I dreamed about her. We were back in the bookstore, arguing about which novel to buy. I woke up smiling and then felt the absence like a bruise. I didn't text her. I let the feeling exist without turning it into a plan. That was new too. A few weeks later, I ran into her again. Not on purpose. At a grocery store this time. She was holding a basket with too many vegetables in it, the same way she used to shop when she had big cooking plans and no time. We stood there between the apples and the cereal like two people who used to live in the same house and now shared only air. "You look lighter," she said. "I feel heavier," I answered, but in a good way. She laughed. It sounded like relief. We walked to the register together. Outside, she hesitated. "Do you ever miss us?" "Yes," I said, "but I don't miss who I was with you." She nodded. "I don't miss who I was either. We didn't exchange promises. We didn't talk about trying again. We said goodbye like adults who had learned something expensive. That night, I realized the story of us was becoming a chapter instead of a definition. Work changed too. I stopped pretending every email was urgent. I let people down in small ways instead of myself in large ones. The strange thing was, nothing collapsed. The company didn't burn. My career didn't die. The world did not punish me for having a boundary. But there was a new loneliness underneath it all. Not the sharp kind from the first weeks. A deeper, slower one. The kind that asks questions instead of screaming. Who do you want to be if no one is watching? I didn't have an answer. So I started experimenting. I signed up for a night class in photography because I liked the idea of noticing things. I joined a weekend hiking group because I wanted to be tired for a reason that wasn't profit. I learned how to cook one complicated dish and ruined it twice before getting it right. Somewhere between those small failures, I felt more like myself than I had in years. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, I got a message from an unknown number. "It's me. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Not because I didn't want to see her, because I wasn't sure what part of me would answer. I didn't reply right away. I set the phone down and finished washing the dishes, even though my hands were shaking. It felt important to prove to myself that I could let a moment exist without surrendering to it. When I finally wrote back, I said, "Yes. Tomorrow?" We met in the same cafe as before, but it felt like a different place. Maybe because I was different in it. She arrived first this time. Her hair was shorter. Her eyes carried something between caution and courage. "I didn't know if I should text you," she said. "I didn't know if I should answer," I replied. We both smiled, and it wasn't painful. She told me she was moving. Not far, but far enough to feel like a decision. A new job. A smaller apartment. A quieter neighborhood. "I wanted to tell you before I go," she said. "You were a big part of my life." I didn't want to disappear again. I nodded. "Thank you for not vanishing." There was a long pause where the old version of me would have rushed in with a speech about change. About how things could be different now. I felt the words forming, ready to perform. But I let them dissolve. Instead, I asked, "Are you happy?" She thought about it. "Not always. But I'm honest now. With myself." That answer landed somewhere deep in me. I realized how often I had confused happiness with approval. How much of my life had been built to impress invisible judges. "I think I'm learning that too," I said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a page from my old notebook. The list titled, "Things I Don't Want to Become." "I found this inside one of your books," she said. "I kept it for a while. It reminded me of the man you wanted to be." I took it like it was fragile. My own handwriting stared back at me, younger and more certain. The line about forgetting who you're doing this for felt heavier now. "I didn't become him," I said. "You're closer now than you were before," she answered. We walked together for a few blocks after that. The city felt louder than usual. Traffic, footsteps, someone arguing on a phone. Life refusing to pause for our emotional clarity. At the corner where we used to separate for work, she stopped. "I don't want to go back," she said gently. I needed to say that out loud so it doesn't turn into hope. "I don't want you to go back either," I said. And I meant it in a way that surprised me. "I don't think love should be a rescue mission." She exhaled, like she had been holding something in. "I was afraid you'd try to save us." "I was afraid you'd let me," I said. We hugged again. Not as closure, but as recognition. Two people who had loved each other without knowing how to live inside that love. That night, I pinned the page from the notebook above my desk. Not as a warning, but as a direction. For the first time, I wasn't asking what I could build to keep someone. I was asking what kind of life I wanted to invite someone into. And that question felt like the beginning of something real. The weeks after that felt like standing on new ground that still shifted under my feet. I kept the page from the notebook above my desk. But I stopped reading it like a commandment and started reading it like a mirror. It didn't tell me what to do. It showed me what I had been avoiding. The biggest test came at work. A major project fell apart when a client pulled out unexpectedly. My boss went into crisis mode. Late nights returned. Urgent meetings multiplied. The old rhythm tried to reclaim me. One evening, he called me and said, "I need you here. Tonight. This could save the quarter." I looked at the clock. I had promised myself I would go to the photography class I kept skipping whenever something felt important. My bag was already by the door. "I can come in early tomorrow," I said. "But not tonight." There was a long silence. "This isn't like you," he said. "I know," I answered. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me most. The next day, the crisis was smaller than everyone had made it sound. The company survived. The quarter limped instead of leaped. No one got fired. The world did not end. But something in me stayed standing. Outside of work, I started noticing how much of my old life had been organized around not being alone. Dinners had been scheduled. Weekends had been filled. Even arguments had been a form of company. Now there were empty spaces. I had to decide what to put in them. I took longer walks. I called my sister and listened instead of rushing. I visited my parents without an excuse attached. I sat with myself when I felt restless instead of trying to distract it into silence. One night, after a hiking trip, I came home sore and tired in a way that felt earned. I stood in the kitchen, cooking something complicated and burning the garlic again, and I thought about how she used to watch me do this with a mix of affection and impatience. For the first time, the memory didn't ache. It explained. She hadn't left because I was cruel. She had left because I was absent. And absence is harder to forgive than anger. I went on a date during that time. A woman from the photography class. Smart. Observant. She asked what I did for a living and then what I did for myself. I didn't know how to answer the second question without talking about what I used to do. We drank wine and laughed politely and hugged goodbye like two people who had enjoyed a conversation, but not a collision. On the way home, I felt a strange gratitude. Not for her, exactly, but for the fact that I didn't feel desperate to turn it into something. I could let a moment be a moment. The loneliness was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't begging anymore. It was waiting. Then, one afternoon, I found a box in the back of a closet. Things she had left behind without meaning to. A scarf. A mug with a crack in it. A ticket stub from a concert we barely remembered. At the bottom was a photo of us from years ago. We were sitting on the floor of the old apartment, eating takeout, surrounded by unpacked boxes. I looked tired and hopeful at the same time. She looked like she trusted me with the future. I sat down with the photo in my hand and finally allowed myself to grieve properly. Not just for her, but for the version of me that thought love could be postponed. I didn't cry loudly. I didn't break anything. I just let the loss be what it was, information. That night, I threw away the mug and kept the scarf. I folded it carefully and put it back in the box. Some things are meant to be remembered. Some things are meant to be released. Learning the difference felt like learning myself. By the time autumn arrived, my life no longer felt like it was waiting for a missing piece. It felt like a shape I was still drawing. The workshop asked if I could take on more hours. One of the women who sold handmade soap had finally turned a profit and wanted help scaling without losing her weekends. A young man who built furniture showed me pictures of a table he sold for more than he ever thought someone would pay. Their small victories felt heavier than my old contracts ever had. It scared me how much that mattered. I started waking up without the familiar pressure in my chest. The city looked different when I wasn't measuring it by deadlines. Mornings had a smell. Evenings had a sound. I noticed things that had always been there and somehow never existed. And then I met someone. Not in a dramatic way. Not through fate. She was a friend of a friend at a small dinner party I almost skipped because it felt safer to stay home. Her name was Lena. She asked me what I was working on, and I almost gave my old answer. Instead, I said, "I'm trying to build a life that doesn't disappear when work turns off." She smiled like she understood what that cost. We talked about ordinary things. Music, food, places we wanted to see without turning them into goals. She didn't lean in too close. She didn't perform interest. She listened like there was time. After that night, we started meeting for coffee, then for walks, then for dinners that didn't feel like interviews. I noticed I didn't rush to impress her. I didn't rush to promise anything either. I was curious instead of hungry. One evening, she asked, "Why did your last relationship end?" I could have told the polished version. I could have blamed timing or pressure or incompatibility. I didn't. I was present in theory, I said, and absent in practice. She nodded. That sounds painful. It was necessary, I answered, and meant it. The past didn't vanish. I still thought about her sometimes, especially when something small happened and there was no one specific to tell. A joke, a street performer, a stupid observation. The instinct to share didn't belong to one person. It belonged to who I was when I cared. That was something I could keep. Work offered me another promotion near the end of the year. More money, more responsibility, a familiar invitation to disappear again. I asked for a week to think about it. In that week, I went hiking with the group. I helped at the workshop. I had dinner with Lena and cooked something that took too long and tasted almost right. I sat alone one night with the scarf folded in the box and the notebook page above my desk. The answer didn't arrive like inspiration. It arrived like recognition. I declined the promotion. My boss stared at me as if I had made a joke in the wrong room. People wait years for this. I know, I said. I already waited once. What surprised me most wasn't his reaction. It was mine. I didn't feel brave. I felt aligned. When I told Lena, she didn't congratulate me. She asked, "Are you scared?" "Yes," I said. "Good," she replied. "That usually means it matters." That winter, I ran into my ex one last time by chance, at the edge of the same park where the street musician used to play. She looked well, not transformed, just settled. We talked for a few minutes. About small things. About how life had rearranged itself. "I see it in you," she said before we parted. "You're here now." "I learned how," I answered. We didn't hug this time. We waved. It felt right. Walking home, I understood something I had missed for a long time. I hadn't lost her to find myself. I had lost myself first, and losing her was how I noticed. The idea stayed with me for days after that I had vanished long before she walked out the door. It changed how I remembered everything. Not as a tragedy where I was abandoned, but as a story where the ending arrived when the lesson was finally loud enough. Lena and I didn't rush into anything official. We let the relationship grow at the speed of trust. There were disagreements, awkward silences, even a few moments where I felt the old instinct to retreat into work and avoid discomfort. But now I noticed it when it happened. One night, after an argument about something small and stupid, I almost stayed late at the office on purpose. I sat at my desk and stared at the screen, waiting for the familiar numbness to return. It didn't. Instead, I felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with productivity. So I went home. I told her I was sorry without adding an explanation. We made tea and sat in the kitchen until the tension dissolved into something human. That was when I understood the difference. Before, love had been something I scheduled around my life. Now it was something I had to show up for, imperfectly and often. Months passed, not in dramatic leaps, but in ordinary days that slowly proved something new. I still worked hard. I still cared about building things. But I no longer used ambition as an excuse to avoid myself. When work was over, it actually ended. When I was with someone, I was there. One evening, I took down the page from the notebook. Not because it had lost meaning, but because it no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a chapter one had already lived. I put it back in the drawer where I had found it and closed it without ceremony. Later that week, I went through the old box one last time. I unfolded the scarf and held it for a moment. It still smelled faintly like the detergent she used. I didn't feel the urge to message her. I didn't feel the need to explain anything to the past. I wrapped the scarf in paper and donated it to a shelter downtown. It felt like returning something to the world instead of carrying it forever. On the walk home, the city looked the same as it always had. Same streets, same noise, same lights in the windows. But I walked through it as someone who belonged to his own life. That night, Lena fell asleep on the couch with her head on my shoulder. The TV murmured something neither of us was watching. I felt the quiet weight of another person trusting me with their rest. And I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't think about tomorrow. I didn't measure the moment. I stayed. For a long time, I believed losing her was the price of ambition. Now I know it was the cost of becoming someone who could love without disappearing. I didn't lose her to find myself. I lost her because I hadn't found myself yet. And finding myself didn't bring her back. It brought me here.